Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Transatlantic Challenges Policy Dialogue focused on why Ukraine's local elections matter. EPC is delighted to be organising this event in cooperation with the Ukrainian think tank's Liaison office in Brussels and also with the US mission to the EU. So welcome to everybody. This will be the first election under the new election code in Ukraine. It's going to be a major test for Zelensky and his Servant of the People party. The first round takes place on the 25th of this month. So we're delighted to have a group of experts with us here today to discuss, let's say, the background to these elections, the election code, what that means for the election, what might happen at the election, and how the result of the election could impact, let's say, the rule of President Zelensky and his Servant of the People party, but I mean, broadly speaking, Ukrainian politics in bigger terms, and also linked to that, the impact, the possible impact on ties with the EU and the US, including the reform process. I mean, there's always a lot of things going on in Ukraine, so I think there's many things for us to discuss today. So I would just like to introduce very briefly the panel that we have with us today. First of all, my partner for this event, Olena, who's Executive Director and co-founder of the Ukrainian think tank Liaison office here in Brussels. Viktor Zamiatin, who's Director of Political and Legal Programs of the Razumkov Center in Kiev. Welcome to you, Viktor. It's very nice to have you with us today. Welcome again to Andrius Kubilius, Chairman of the EURONEST Committee in the European Parliament. Thanks for joining us again. You were with us last week, so it's nice that you could come back. And last but not least, Melinda Haring, who's the Deputy Director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council in Washington. Thank you, Melinda, particularly because you've had to get up very early in the morning to join us today. Welcome again to you all. To the audience, just the usual housekeeping rules. If you would like to ask a question, you can do it either by typing the question into the dialogue box, which you will find at the right-hand side of your screen, or alternatively by clicking on the hand also on the right-hand side of the screen. And I hope that we're going to have a lot of questions because, as I said, there's a lot of things to talk about always with Ukraine. But first of all, I would like to hand over to Olena, not just to give a welcoming remark on the side of her organization, but also to deliver some opening remarks related to the background of these elections, the new electoral system, what the result could tell us, etc. So I hand over to you, Olena.
Thank you, Amanda. Hi, everyone. And on behalf of the Ukrainian think tank Liaison office in Brussels, I'm glad to welcome all participants at our joint event with the European Policy Center, and yes, indeed, with the support of International Renaissance Foundation and US mission to the European Union. And we are glad to continue our work on informing on processes in Ukraine, and we are happy to have all of you together with us today. Yes, indeed, my today intervention will build upon three major parts. To introduce the background of elections. Second, what we need to keep an eye during the electoral day, and what results of elections may tell us about the political landscape of the country, and maybe better understanding of the processes and some future forecasts of further developments. So let's start from the background. As Amanda already has mentioned, yes, indeed, these elections will be held with everything is new election legislation, new electoral system, new territorial structure, and new ballots. Some details: new territorial structure. Due to the recent administrative and territorial reform in Ukraine, number of districts of Ukraine has been reduced by about 4 times. New electoral system. The threshold now is 10,000 voters. So above 10,000 voters, the local councils will be elected upon proportional system with open party lists, and this is absolute novelty in the Ukrainian history. And beyond 10,000 voters, the majority system. A new expanded scope of power of the elected bodies. So this means that the value of the elected positions, it's much higher than before, including with the budget authorities on the local level. The gender quota has been introduced, and now around 40% of women may be in the party list. This is again the biggest, one of the big novelties. And new complicated ballots. Actually, the voter has some job to do, and the way how the voter needs to vote on the party differs from the way how he or she needs to choose the candidates. So this is introduction from this side. Then, yes, unfortunately, due to COVID-19, expected low voter turnout, only 30 to 40% of voters are expected to come. Another thing which is important to know, it's that this election will be held upon the grounds that the president and his political power. Hello? Yes? Anything? I heard something in my microphone. No? So the president and his political power are losing trust and support of voters. Due to several sociological recent polls, he has been given by voters up to 22 to 29% of those who have already kind of chosen if the election of the president would be today, which is in any case not comparable to this famous 73% of what he has gained in the last presidential election. And to continue with this sociological picture of today's Ukraine, unfortunately, there's a big number of those who are dissatisfied with the current state of affairs in the country, and with the action of authorities, and with the dissatisfaction with their own socio and economic conditions. 68% believe that things in Ukraine are going in the wrong direction, and 57% they accuse incompetence of authorities to stop economical degradation of economical situation. Then what is important also to know that this electoral campaign is happening on the rise of local political parties, movements, individual candidates who have no affiliation to the central parties, or even they have no ideology standing behind. And there's also, during recent 2 years, there has been reorganization of old political brands and appearance of the new political brands. And it also creates a difficulty for the voter to understand what is the background of these political forces, who finances them, and who in the end they will represent when or if they will be elected. On another side, the well-known network Opora, whose specialty is electoral process in the country, they have reported then that unfortunately violations on electoral campaign have been recorded. Some of them are not so, they're bad but not so serious, but what they said that there are some which may have impact on the results and are grave. And this is first of all abusing of administrative resources and material, and providing material incentives for voters. As you may know, the recently president has announced so-called questionnaire with 5 at the moment not all known questions are known. And what is important to know that this questionnaire has no legal power and cannot be held at the polling stations. And it's also not clear what is this. In the best case scenario, it may be just an attempt to increase popularity of the president political party. On the worst case scenario, it may be a manipulative instrument with possibly forthcoming consequences for the country, and not all of them are positive, let's say. On the background of the COVID-19, again, I rely here on the data of Opora. Unfortunately, they reported that the country and the authorities didn't do enough job in order to provide protective measures for the voters and for those who are engaged in the electoral process, including the members of the voting committees, and also people who have been who are COVID-19 positive, or for this or another reason must be self-isolated. They have right to vote, and the committee needs to come to their places. And again, members of the committees are not enough protected to do this. And another deadly virus where Ukraine already has some vaccine, but unfortunately every electoral process, this virus is coming back. It's meaning the activation of openly or hidden pro-Russian political forces. And again, there's no wonder that they will try to use this electoral process as another attempt to expand their influence inside of Ukraine. So this is about the background. What we need to keep an eye during the elections. So as always, on procedures, and I would name only three like main. Of course, first and foremost, democratic character of the elections and adherence to procedures. Second, how voters and all engaged in the electoral process are protected with the COVID-19. And number three, this novelty, is how this actually president's questionnaire will be distributed and completed, and whether it will be done during the electoral day. So this is during the day, and what we may expect after the election. Actually, the results of the local elections may tell us a lot about give us information to forecast the future, to give us enough data to monitor and to understand the political landscape of the country. And the list which I'm going to present, it's of course not exhaustive, and I believe that our participants may add their factors, what they will read and understand from elections. But for me, some of the most important things is, yes, first of all, level of adherence to democratical principles, first of all, by the current authorities, and it will be measured by the level of violations or their absence. Then adherence to democratic electoral process means adherence to European integration and reform process in Ukraine. So directly or indirectly, we will have a chance to see whether European integration of Ukraine is the real thing for the authorities, or it's window dressing, as many people may say today. The results of the votes actually also will represent the vote of confidence or distrust to the current authorities, and they will actually will help us to understand the real level of support of the authorities, and also to demonstrate whether voters are ready and know how to transform their feelings, their dissatisfaction or satisfaction into the real action during the electoral process. And provided that elections are free and fair, it will give us better understanding of the future of the political landscape. And here I would just suggest to keep an eye on several division lines. First of all, ruling party versus opposition party or other political parties. Then what is this level of distribution between central political forces and local political forces? And again, the level of and geography probably of the scope of openly pro-Russian forces. And again, to keep an eye on the questionnaire, and actually the way how the results will be used will help us to answer the question, what was this instrument to raise attention, to raise popularity, or an instrument to manipulate. So Let's keep an eye. Elections are always important in Ukraine. Let's keep an eye. Let's continue our work, and results of elections will certainly give us enough food for our future work and for our future meetings. Thank you. Amanda.
Thank you, Olena, for this really good overview. I mean, I would have a lot of questions actually to ask you about many of the things you raised, but I think we have to keep that for the discussion. So I want to immediately turn to you, Viktor. Perhaps you can give us some insights onto the general political trends in the country and the elections and the political significance of these elections.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Oh, I say that Olena gave us a very good presentation, and it's not so easy to add something significant. But well, from the very start, I'd like to admit that there are two positive points. One of them is that about 2/3 of our compatriots think that their vote will be important. I think it's the highest possible level. And the second is that about 1/3 of our compatriots believe that the results of this local election will really improve the situation in their region. Well, I think it's really the positive sign for our citizens who still believe in the improvement of the situation. In fact, there are two major factors that really influence the situation in general and the local election per se. First of all, it's the pandemic and the actions of the central government, what Olena have already said about, and the second is the new electoral legislation, basically the new electoral code, which was adopted last December. According to the new electoral rules, we see that the role of the political parties is tremendously increased. And on the other hand, we know that there are about 350 political parties officially registered in Ukraine. And by the calculation of our colleagues from the Committee of Voters of Ukraine, about half of these political parties are participating in the process of the local elections. Another thing, and Olena has already admitted this, is that majority of these political parties are functioning only within the boundaries of the this or another oblast region or this or another city. It means that we have a lot of the so-called regional or local parties, which represent the interests of the local elites.
Yep.
And this is another aspect of this situation in general. The local elites, after the beginning of the process of decentralization, and especially after the budget decentralization, received the very good tools to improve their situation vis-à-vis the central government. They became really strong and influential, while the influence of the central government is declining from the beginning of this year. It means thus that the election will be not only the test for the president and his political party, but also at the same time the test for the local elites, what do they really want? Do they want the cooperation with the central government, or do they really want the confrontation, as we saw a couple of months before, when several city mayors really confronted the president and the government in this situation with the actions against pandemic of this coronavirus. As for the other aspects, I'd like to say that probably the majority of the city mayors will be re-elected, despite all the efforts of president and his political allies. Probably the local political parties in general will gain about 21–22% of the votes all around Ukraine. It means that they will have maybe majority, maybe the very important factions at the regional councils. And thus, the party of President Zelensky, the servant of the people, will be forced or to create the coalition with the local political forces or to confront them. So we will see what way will be the best, what further development will be after the elections. And after that, we can see that the new wave of the new political leaders are emerging, such as the city mayor of the city of Dnipro, Mr. Filatov, the city mayors of such cities as Vinnytsia, Khmelnytsky, and some others. And these new leaders will perform probably the new approaches, but nobody knows which ones. And what else can I say is that after all, these local elections will be only the first step, probably the first really serious event to see what political and electoral system will we have in the forthcoming months. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much as well, Viktor. Again, you gave us some really interesting insights for the possible implications of the elections and the possible confrontation between these local elites and Ukraine's leadership. And I think, again, we can get into more details on this during the discussion session, because I think it's a really important topic going forward. But I'd now like to give the floor to Mr. Kubilius, who's no stranger to Ukraine. I think he's probably one of the best informed EU officials on Ukraine, not least because of his role as chairman of EURONEST, but also because of his previous role being the Prime Minister of Lithuania. So we know that Ukraine is very close to your heart. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on how these elections could impact, I'm guessing in particular, I mean, not just the internal situation on Ukraine in a possibly very negative way, but also the relationship with the European Union, which is crucially important for Ukraine, as we know.
Well, thanks a lot. Really, it's a pleasure and privilege to try to say a few words about how we see Ukrainian elections, which are really very important. And it's such a coincidence that globally perhaps there are 5 most important elections coming soon. One of them are Ukrainian local elections, Then, elections in Moldova, presidential elections and parliamentary elections in Georgia. On Friday, we shall have our, seminar. So I'm advertising our seminar on those elections, on how things are coming. And then 2 additional elections, One is small elections in the United States of America, quite soon are coming. And then, most important elections, of course, in Lithuania, where we shall have, second round of parliamentary elections on Sunday. So that is a whole picture. Now, to be more serious, on Ukrainian elections. In general, I would, first of all, I would say that we can see Ukrainian elections in more general picture of the whole eastern part of Europe, where I see really some kind of tectonic shifts are starting to happen. First of all, of course, I have in mind Belarus, then some developments in Russia itself, and that is where we need to see also Ukrainian elections. Now, on Ukrainian elections, of course, I am not so much informed about all the details. Olena said a lot of things which she knows much better. Or Viktor, I have just general opinion and general things which I can share with you. And when I'm looking into what I see, of course, first of all, we see opinion polls. Despite the fact that those are local elections, but nevertheless, there are opinion polls which are showing how things can happen and what will be the outcome if we are looking into major, political forces. And of course, it looks like that, Sluga Narodu and President political party will have less than they had previously, in eastern part of Ukraine, some kind of those, what we can call, remnants of the region party, or we can call them pro-Russian parties. They are recovering, and well, it can be for somebody a surprise. For me, it reminds again my own, conclusion that a lot of things which are happening in let's say in all this, area of post-Soviet, territories, starting from 1990s, are very similar, and what is happening now in Ukraine reminds me what was happening back in Lithuania in 1990s, at the very beginning. And I'm always repeating, my famous, well, I came into politics from physics, so I was learning by doing, and I remember what an influence on me was done by the famous Samuel Huntington books, for example, Third Wave and Political Order in Changing Societies, where he explained what is happening in new democracies. How political developments are going on, and what is an outcome of elections. And at that time, when those books were published, and the last one, Third Wave, was published in 1991, I saw really that we in Lithuania repeated all his theoretical, explanations. And now I see that Ukraine is in some way repeating some kind of similar developments after last, Maidan revolution. I will remind, very simply, what Huntington was saying. That first elections after revolution, which was in Lithuania, it was 1990. In Ukraine, I'm taking, 2014. That first elections usually are won by a revolutionary party, which was, Poroshenko and Solidarność, European Solidarność back in 2014. In Lithuania, it was our Sąjūdis and Landsbergis team. Then, according to Huntington, because people are expecting, very soon to see some miracles to happen after revolution, people are becoming dissatisfied, and that is why, usually revolutionary parties are losing next elections. That is what had happened, with Poroshenko last year, and that was shock for us in 1992. When we lost totally, next parliamentary elections to former Communist Party. That was again, very similar development. Then really those who are coming in the second elections, usually are also not able to keep their popularity for a long period of time. You can see that people who voted with nostalgia and so on, they are also very soon or because of some kind of voted for some kind of populistic appeals, they are becoming dissatisfied also with those nostalgia and populistic appeals, and perhaps that is also starting to happen in Ukraine. So for me, what I see in all those opinion polls, for me it's nothing very special. Of course, it can be painful for ruling party, it can be painful for president, but I see it like again a proof that the late Huntington was right in his forecast and in his calculations. So really, elections will have really big impact on Ukraine, definitely. And again, I can tell from our own experience that perhaps in Ukraine also we will face quite a different developments in different municipalities. In some municipalities, you will see really how the local democracy will flourish, but in other municipalities, you will see how local autocracy will strengthen themselves. That is again what was happening in Lithuania. So nothing very special and very new. And that is where I will finish with my appeal to EU. Because again, the question is how in EU those election results will be perceived and what conclusions in EU will be made. And that is where I see quite a difference, because in 1992 and 1993, when we were facing those big tectonic, or let's say big political changes in Lithuania, and the same had happened then, in Poland and in other Central European countries, EU was clever enough to come out with clear perspective of our integration towards EU. I would remind you that in 1993, EU came out with so-called Copenhagen criteria, decision on Copenhagen criteria, which for us it was very clear message that is how the doors are starting to open. We still had no formal invitation, no even association agreement, but for us it was a message that the Western community is opening for us, and that had major stabilization effect on us. Despite all our political changes and political shifts from the left to the right, we were calling ourselves Italians of the North, that we are very emotional, we are Catholics, we are moving from one side to another side. Nevertheless, I don't know if that is a critical remark about Italians, but that was what was happening in our country. Exactly this perspective that we are able to achieve our major geopolitical and strategic goal, our integration towards EU, was keeping us on track. So that's what we would like to see, that despite how elections will what will be the outcome of elections in Ukraine, which really are very important elections. Here will be some kind of political signals which those elections will send to both to Ukrainians and to EU itself. Inside of EU, we need to be much more ambitious with broad integration agenda. Really, I see that in the eastern part of Europe, big changes are starting to happen, and EU needs to be ready. And if to speak more concretely about Ukraine or three of most advanced countries, I would like to see much more ambitious EU agenda towards three of associated countries, where we would like to see much more of elements of EU policy which we can see in EU policy towards Western Balkans. That's all. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Kubilius. I mean, I would also like to see a much stronger EU policy towards the Eastern Partnership countries, and particularly Ukraine. But I mean, I think it's fair to say the current internal business, as always, seems to be consuming the EU, not least, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, also you can see a sort of reduced focus as well, even on the Western Balkans, which is also, you know, extremely worrying, all things considered. But definitely this is something that we should be aiming for, because it's very important to keep this, you know, strong relationship and building on this strong relationship between Ukraine and the EU. Just before I turn to Melinda, just a quick word, Viktor. Apparently there's some problems with your signal, that you're not coming across very clear. I'm not sure if you have any other appliance, telephone or whatnot opened near to you. If you have, maybe it would be an idea to close them so we could perhaps get a better signal. Thank you. And also to the audience, I would like to encourage you to put your questions into the dialogue box, because we're nearly coming to that part of the debate, or also by clicking on the hand. So now I'd like to turn to Melinda from Washington to get your perception on how you see these local elections. I mean, particularly coming from the other side of the Atlantic. I mean, what do they mean for the US, or perhaps, you know, what can this mean going forward in terms of the relationship with either the Trump and a second Trump administration or a first Biden administration? I know you're a frequent visitor to Ukraine. You were even supposed to be there today, but unfortunately you are in Washington. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amanda. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here with all of you. I've admired your work for many years, Amanda, so it's really nice to be here. I have 5 obvious points about the Ukrainian elections, and then I'll turn to what Andrius called the little elections in the United States. So I think the headline, when you look at Ukraine's elections, is that servant of the people is going to get thrashed. They were elected last year with a huge wave of popularity, both the presidential and the parliamentary elections. And if you believe the polls, which a lot of people are suspicious of, their numbers have really crashed in the last year. Zelensky gave a speech in the Rada this week that was relatively strong, but it was also, I think, marked by its populist notes as well. My colleague Brian Mefford, who's based in Kiev, says that 2020 will be a year that favors incumbents. And I think that's right, looking just at Ukraine. And he says it's ironic after a year of change. So 2019 was the big year of change in Ukraine. And this year, incumbents are expected to win in Kiev, in Odessa, and Lviv, and maybe Dnipro. So that's one piece to keep your eye on. Is this is probably a year where the incumbents are going to come out on top. And to be more explicit, servant of the people is not going to win the mayor seats in these 4 big cities in Ukraine. Number 2, and I apologize for bearing the headline. The headline here, and I'm shocked that the 3 of you guys didn't say Kolomoisky. All eyes are on Kolomoisky, Ukraine's most notorious oligarch. That's what this election is fundamentally about. He's trying to extend his influence and presence in the country. He has somewhere between 30 to 40 loyal MPs in the Rada, and he's making trouble there, and he's trying to make trouble across the country. He may be preparing for the next round of parliamentary elections, and this may be an attempt to start blackmailing Zelensky to form a new coalition. We can dive into the numbers, but there's ways, if things go really badly and Kolomoisky's party For Future does well across the country, there's some shenanigans he could pull in the Rada that would be really nasty towards a pro-reform agenda. I think those are probably unlikely and a little far-fetched, but happy to dive into those if we want to talk about scenarios. The third point, though, for American and Western political scientists, we think about party affiliation and ideology. This local election is a reminder over and over and over again that there are no such things as political parties in Ukraine. This idea, to put it more elegantly, it's a reminder of the fluidity of party affiliation. For Future's popped up. There's a new party that popped up that unites 5 or 6, no, it's more than that, mayors across Ukraine. This is a new political party. Parties come, parties go in Ukraine. One good thing that I see coming out of these local elections is that former residents of the now occupied parts of the Donbass or Donetsk and Luhansk Oblasts can finally vote according to their current address. So that's a good thing to watch. And then the 5th thing that I'm watching and I'm worried about is that there don't seem to be very good COVID-19 procedures for the upcoming elections. I think it'll be interesting to see how that affects turnout. I don't think it's going to affect turnout very much, but I'm worried about elections causing COVID to spread. The rates in Ukraine are really alarming. I'm not there because the rates went up. Now, let me turn to our local elections in America. So, of course, we have a major presidential election underway. We're less than 3 weeks out. Let me say some obvious things. The US-Ukrainian relationship is very, very, very tense because of what happened last year. Regardless of the winner of the election, it doesn't matter if it's Joe Biden or Trump, that relationship needs to be repaired, and it's going to be hard. It will be easier if it's Joe Biden. It will be harder if it's Donald Trump, to state the obvious. Now, when you step back and look at their policy prescriptions and the people that they are likely to put in positions of power that would be in charge of US policy toward Russia and US policy toward Ukraine, Ukrainians would favor Biden for the most part. Biden obviously supports NATO. He has a personal relationship with the elite in Ukraine. He cares about the reform agenda working. He wants Ukraine to become a normal Western country. He's very committed to Ukraine. Trump, we don't know how he's going to behave. I've been involved in some scenarios where everyone who does foreign policy in the United States says, what's your best guess on how he'll behave in a second administration when he's less tethered, when he's not going to face re-election? So in our region, there's a possibility that he'll pull out of NATO. And there's a possibility that he would make a deal over Ukraine, that he would do some kind of trading agreement with Putin. He might trade Crimea away. He might trade the Donbass away. We don't know. I think the broader point, though, is that he's likely to have a very lousy and an inexperienced team of foreign policy hands that work on Russia and Eurasia. The kind of people who are going to be attracted to a second-term Trump administration are not the A team. They're not even the B team. They're people who don't know anything about this region and have not worked on it. Biden, though, and this is not a full-throated endorsement of either candidate. This is me just looking at it, trying to look at it dispassionately. The people who will work on Ukraine and Russia in a Biden administration have an immense amount of experience. The person who's likely to be the top Ukraine person is outstanding, and he knows what he's doing. However, there is going to be friction within a Biden administration over Russia and Ukraine. I don't think it's a slam dunk. There's going to be tension between an older group, a more experienced group that wants an arms agreement with Russia, and then a younger group of people who want to press forward on the reform agenda in Ukraine. And those things will likely be in tension. So watch this space. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Melinda. I think we're all going to be watching this space, you know, when it comes to the election night. Just before, you know, I open the floor to the discussion, I would just like to put a couple of questions forward myself. I mean, all of you have more or less said that that the servant of the People Party and Zelensky is sort of on track to do very badly at this election. So I'm just, you know, wondering, I mean, wasn't this sort of always going to be, you know, the case based on the predictions when he was, you know, originally elected? I mean, the message was, I mean, he doesn't have any political experience, he's going to be manipulated, he won't be able to prevent influence from oligarchs, and then that was sort of followed up with this very eclectic group of servants or people, MPs that seem to have been pulled from everywhere, every type of background, you know, inexperienced and whatnot. So I'm just wondering, actually, I mean, is there any way that, you know, Zelensky and his party, you know, can turn around, I mean, his current sort of negative situation, or how, I mean, it looks increasingly like he's heading for, you know, as you said, a slam dunk. Is it possible that he can turn around his you know, his state of affairs, even if he does badly, if the party does badly in this election? I mean, what needs to be done to change, you know, his fortunes, if anything can be done? I guess I put that to the Ukrainian friends first.
Viktor, will you start, please?
Well, I'll try. As for me, it's my personal perception. Zelensky only tries to be an influential actor, to be president. It's true that he does not have any serious experience. It is true that his environment also does not have the necessary competences and the necessary experiences. And it is true that probably all our new elite is not being prepared for this situation as we had it a year and a half ago when Zelensky became president. Since the time, we saw that maybe despite Mr. Kolomoisky's efforts expressed in his interview of the year of 2019, the general political course of the country did not change. Maybe it was because of the society's activities. I mean, first of all, the so-called civil society activists who conducted several demonstrations and several actions against the possible politics of capitulation. Maybe it is because the results of the several opinion polls conducted by different organizations that showed that the society in majority doesn't support some very sensible issues, such as the concessions before Russia, such as the possible political changes in favor of the so-called oligarchs and Mr. Kolomoisky himself, and so on. But now we see a very interesting situation. It is also true that public support for Mr. Zelensky declines. Mm-hmm. And now it's about 20 to 30% according to different opinion poll results. It is also true that our society does not see any real alternative to Mr. Zelensky. Mm. For Mr. Poroshenko, despite his activities and his successes, nor Mrs. Tymoshenko, nor Mr. Boyko, nor many other political leaders of the past, they are amongst the most distrusted people in Ukraine. So none of them can be the real political rival from Mr. Zelensky. And thus, at my point of view, this situation opens floor for different manipulations, but at the same time, it probably forces Mr. Zelensky to be a president.
I would add a little bit. I like this notion of Mr. Kubilius to see things in its prospects, in its future transformative meaning. And if we look at Mr. Zelensky and his party in this way, and the fact that he is losing attractiveness to people, it also, if to look at it from the political point of view or political system point of view. So what was Mr. Zelensky when he was elected as the president? Actually, he had no clear ideology, and it was intentional because he was collecting dissatisfaction of people. He didn't like the current status quo. They wanted something new, and actually he has collected these votes. After 1.5 years of him being in power, people start to understand what it is, what is he doing, and this dissatisfaction is growing among those who have supported him because he actually did not meet their expectations, and he didn't meet expectations of both, even to say like pro-European integration people who were also among his voters, and for even these pro-Russian voters who were also among them. So, and the political process and local elections, one of them is just give an opportunity to these people to find other political affiliations. And that's what is the most important, is just to keep going and to keep political process clear and fair. And sooner or later, all of this, Ukraine is no wonder, Ukraine is no surprise, is no, indeed, all the processes are repeating itself with some local particularities, but the main is keep going and keep the political process clear and fair and inclusive for everyone.
But the question is about Zelensky, though. It was inevitable that he would fall, right? If you look at polling, Ukrainians, I think Viktor said this, they think they elect a savior, everyone falls in love with them, the numbers are very high, and then they drop very precipitously. This happens over and over again in Ukraine. This is something that we can say with certainty will happen. However, Zelensky was different than some of his predecessors. He decided, okay, sure, he didn't have any ideology, he was new, has no political experience, but he actually had the audacity to say that I will bring peace to Ukraine. He did have a bit, and he said, I'm going to make the country rich, I'm going to bring peace to the country, and I'm going to make the country less corrupt. Those are crazy ambitions. You can't do that in a year. I'm not defending Zelensky, but I'm saying he at least is trying to do something huge. No one thinks that, I mean, maybe the voters are disappointed, sure. If I were Zelensky's advisor, I would tell him to dig in and try to work on the economy. He made a huge mistake, an inexcusable mistake in March by sacking his pro-reform government. He hired a bunch of people who don't know what they're doing. Ukraine has tons of smart people. He hired the C team to run his government. It doesn't make any sense. And he did it right before the pandemic. So could he turn things around? Yes. He's an excellent communicator. I don't know how much he listens. He's very arrogant. He has a very narrow circle. He doesn't trust anyone, and that's a result of his experience in the movie business. He needs to bring in technical people who understand economics. He needs to bring in a new government with people who have expertise in the West and who've run real things. When he chose Denis Shmyhal, I called everyone in Kiev and I said, "Who the hell is Denis Shmyhal?" And they all said, "We don't know." I mean, give me a break. Get a real government, and you could turn things around.
Very briefly, if I may, again, from our experience, I don't know if Zelensky is making mistakes. Of course, everybody, who is in power usually is making mistakes. I was twice prime minister, and the first time when I was prime minister, we finished. We had 70 seats in the parliament, which was exactly half of the seats of the parliament, and we finished after my very successful, being a prime minister, we finished with 8 seats. So that happens, So, but after some time again, I was re-elected. So I see again, that perhaps Zelensky as a phenomena was unavoidable almost, for Ukraine. And it's again, I would not be surprised if Zelensky will lose elections, after his term in office. And according to, again, our experience, Lithuanian or Polish experience, what we can call pro-Western forces or real Maidan forces will come back. I don't know if Poroshenko or whoever will be, leading those forces, but that was what had happened in Lithuania in 1996 and Poland 1997. So that's how democracy is working in this post-revolutionary, situation. Now, to keep popularity in a post-revolutionary situation in a real democracy is almost, if you are in power, it's almost impossible. I don't know any good example in all Central Europe where post-revolutionary, powers were able to keep popularity. So either you are Democrat, and you are losing popularity, or you are switching to autocracy, and then you are keeping your popularity, with very clear, steps to manage media, to kick, or to suppress opposition, and so on and so on. Then you can keep your popularity. That's the choice. In Lithuania, the first government which managed to serve, the whole term in 4 years term was my second government in 2008, when we won elections after Lehman Brothers collapsed. And I think that we were able to keep our government stable simply because nobody wanted to come in, because really crisis was terrible, and and we had really quite a lot of separation. Now, what I see as a problem, systemic problem, I don't know how Ukraine can move, forward, looking into longer-term perspective. Not now. It's really personalization of power in Ukraine, which is a little bit what I can say. It's a little bit at least in the European continent. It's not. We have usually much more parliamentary systems, not presidential systems. And if you are going from the west to the east, you see how more personalized powers are becoming more how to say, more often you can see in the east those personalized powers, and that's of course different from American system. And in the European continent we have only Macron with real presidential system. All others are semi-presidential systems or parliamentary systems. And then really the division of job is very simple. Usually presidents are very popular and keeping popularity, like almost like monarchs or kings, in other countries. They do not have very big, constitutional responsibilities. But for people, it's very important to have at least one symbol in the country, in the constitution, who is keeping popularity. Governments are usually doing the job. They are losing very quickly popularity, and they are very easily changed. That is what is happening, and what was happening in Central Europe, and what was happening also in Lithuania. We were having quite popular presidents. Usually, presidents were able to win, 2 terms in a row. But governments, as I said, we had always, governments very easily to be removed. And the first government which stayed in power for all 4 years was my government, and that was 18 years after our independence was declared, after our revolution, and 4 years after we joined the EU. So that's what we need to keep in mind.
Thank you. I would now like to give the floor to one of the members of the audience who has a hand up, Matia Neles. If my colleague could unmute. Yeah, Natalie, can you unmute?
Matia, you are self-muted. There you go.
Yes. Hello, greetings from Berlin. Fascinating discussion. I wanted to ask about local elections, but Melinda, you triggered me to a small comment on Shmichal. Whether or not the dissolution of the government was justified or not is another question, but I just want to say that from Berlin's perspective, Shmichal has proven to be quite an able manager. He recently had a meeting with the German business community, and they are quite content that even the government, on which behalf I don't speak, but I know a lot of people in there, they found a good working relation with Shmichal. So just from that perspective, he seems to prove himself as an able manager. And there's some pockets, I agree with your pessimism in the general, but there's some pockets of reform in some ministries left with whom you can work and advance reforms. But now my questions regarding local elections. There are 18 municipalities in about 500,000 residents which are not allowed to vote along and near the front line. And I wanted to get your perspective, maybe Viktor or Olena, on that, because that contradicts the very essence of democracy, in my opinion. It was NDI who pointed that out in their pre-election monitoring report. But these are municipalities which have voted in, I think, all of them in the national elections last year. So that is a step back. And lastly, how to strike a balance on the kind of between decentralization and accountability. So obviously Sluha will lose big, and you were discussing that, but how do we strike the balance? Decentralization will be finalized, and Germany cares a lot about it, and everyone here in Berlin is worried that having lost the election, Sluha will turn their back on decentralization and try to turn back certain things of the decentralization. So how do you view that? How do you increase accountability vis-a-vis corrupt or even separatist-minded elites on the local level, and that? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matia. Olena, would you like to start off?
I will give to Viktor to start on this. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, I think this question consists of 3 or 4 different questions. Yes. And I wonder which one is the best to start with. The last one, what probably to
yeah, the last, well, whichever one you want to start with. I think probably the balance between the decentralization and accountability.
Yes.
Can you hear me, Viktor?
First of all, of course, you know that the process of decentralization is not yet finished. For it requires some changes to the constitution. It requires the redesigning of the whole administrative system. It requires probably the establishment of the new system and new level of the relation between the central government and the local communities and the regional authorities and so on. So, and when we are talking about the decentralization and the balances and the reliability, we probably have to keep in our minds that first of all, the local authorities and the self-government bodies in the new formed communities always have to respect the constitution and to function within their competences, which are not very wild. At the same time, their competences allow them to probably to deal with the local agenda, such as education, healthcare, construction, attraction of investments, and so on. And thus, probably it's a very good ground to find the real balance between the business interests and the interests of the inhabitants of the communities. And maybe on this ground, we can see how, in general, maybe the new political system and the new political confidence can function. But as I said before, first of all, it requires the probably the adopting of the necessary political solutions, adopting of the necessary budgetary solutions, and of course establishing the completely new political and administrative system. I'm sorry, can you refresh me the first half of the question?
Yeah, we're talking about the 500,000 people who are living on the front line who aren't able to vote, and what does this mean in terms of democracy or the democratic results of the elections?
For it's always very, very important dispute in terms of democracy and in terms of security. As far as I remember, well, there are 19 communities on the front line where the local elections are not being conducted this Sunday. And the explanation of the central government and of the president's side was that it's always about the people's security. I wonder, really, is it so easy to conduct the elections on the very front line, where no security guarantees cannot be done? I wonder also, is it possible to organize the good and sustainable work of the electoral committees on these territories? The presence of the national and international observers and media, of course. For every point requires the very strong guarantees of security. And of course, this issue must be solved in terms of democracy, but only after we can solve the questions of security.
And to add to what Viktor said on this last issues, yes, indeed, it was the so-called military and civil administrations who have given the lists of these communities where the local elections couldn't be held, although previously there have been presidential elections on this. Yes, and there was a big discussion in Ukraine, including the non-governmental sector and expert community, and actually this gap has been discovered, and that we need to cover this gap in the future. Who provides these lists and under which criteria these lists are being created? So this is just another work for us for the future.
Okay, I would like to move to a second question now. It's also a verbal question from Mark Rakievich, and I apologize if I pronounced your name incorrectly. We're going to unmute you.
Hi. Yes, thank you for holding this event. And I believe my question is addressed to Viktor regarding the possible friction that may emerge after the local elections between, as I believe you mentioned, the local elites and the central government, against the backdrop that Ukraine is inheriting a new map, right? More than 1,400 newly formed communities, half of which need to gain electoral legitimacy. They've been formed and voted in yet. So I think they're getting more powers, resources, and decision-making from Kyiv delegated to them. And so maybe, Viktor, you can speak more about, elaborate more what you meant about possible friction emerging between local elites and the Kyiv central government against all these new developments.
I don't know, Viktor, did you hear all correctly, or shall we ask Amanda to help us to?
I'm sorry.
Okay, I think I'm sorry. I think you're going to have to repeat the question because I didn't hear it well either. If you don't mind. Just
the question itself, please.
Okay, the question itself is,
yeah.
Would you please elaborate on an earlier point that you made regarding the possible emergence of friction between local elites on the ground and the central government in Kyiv via the newly formed communities and the more powers they are receiving as a result of decentralization? Thank you.
Okay, did you get that question this time, Viktor?
Well, it's a very good question, and I think that, as I said before, after this election, we really will see the readiness of the local elites and their local self-government bodies to cooperate, despite probably their political tensions and their different views and so on. But in fact, every local council always consists of different representatives of the local business, political, intellectual, and other elites. And every time since the very beginning, they managed to find a way to cooperate. I strongly believe that it is still possible. While, of course, the question of the competition of rivalry between different business interests is open.
Okay, do you want to add anything, Olena? Or?
Just a few things. I think that this competition between local central political system is good as any competition. And actually, yes, indeed, this is happening on the background of increased volumes of actually authorities, including in terms of the budget, which now local authorities will have. So, and this, for me, it's a good way to develop the political system. This is the good way to bring new faces, including women faces, because don't forget the gender quota has been finally introduced. And for me, it's a correct step into the correct direction. And let's see, the main thing, I just want to come back to what I have seen. In Ukraine, for Ukraine, the main thing, individuals are not that important as processes are important, procedures are important. We need to keep going in training democracy. We need to keep going and to keep process clear and fair. And European Union and international community is absolutely crucial, have an absolutely crucial role in this to help Ukraine to keep the procedures and to help us to fight against the external aggression. And the rest will be done by Ukrainians, with all mistakes, with all shortcomings, but will be done.
If you allow me a very brief remark, that the newly elected self-government, such as the regional and city councils, can be a very important source for recruiting the new ministers, the new members of parliament in the future, and so on. So you see, it's democracy itself.
Can I push back a little bit on what Olena just said? I don't think anyone is worried about I don't think anyone's worried about the procedures. If you look at Ukraine's elections, they're relatively clean. This isn't Azerbaijan. This isn't Kazakhstan. No one's stealing ballot boxes. Democracy is well established in Ukraine. I think the bigger problem is a lack of political maturity, and people need to grow up, and people need to understand that the point of putting people in the Rada isn't to steal and isn't to benefit you personally, that there's a greater sense of politics beyond just self-enrichment. That's the bigger problem.
I want to react on this. So what's now the global democratic processes teach us, never take democracy for granted. Even well-established democracies may set back. And that's why I'm emphasizing on procedures, because political maturity, and I absolutely agree with you, but political maturity comes with the training, comes with the experience, comes with even self-participation in the processes, which this, for example, these local elections are given. So that's why this is why I am emphasizing on this.
Yeah, I think you're right that you learn by doing, but it's not the biggest danger. No one's going to steal the elections. I mean, the biggest danger is you know, that the system itself, you know, that people aren't. I mean, the danger is different than what you're describing. Ukraine's institutions and its democratic structure works. That's not the biggest danger.
And the biggest danger is immaturity of people. Yes, but how to become them mature? They need to learn, they need to participate, and it's also obligation of the political forces to teach the electorate and to increase their knowledge and actually the notion of self-responsibility for the future of the country, so that actually their voting actually impacts their life.
Sure,
and how
sure.
we are going to exactly. And I'm not speaking about, once again, I never have spoken about purity of the procedure of only these particular local elections. What I meaning keeping the process going, keeping the political process in Ukraine going, also including the political, elections, but not only all other aspects of political process.
Yeah, especially media. I mean, that's something that we haven't talked about
Maybe I
at all.
Absolutely.
move to the next question.
That all of the major television stations are owned by oligarchs. How are you going to educate voters if you don't have a free media? I mean, that's a huge issue. I think that needs to be part of the discussion as well.
Maybe not to watch it. Okay.
Okay, actually I have a question about oligarchs here, as you've just mentioned it, and it's asking, have there been any incidents of ballot buying by local oligarchs? We know this is something that used to be a regular occurrence actually in Ukraine, but has it been wiped out, or could we still expect that? Who wants to take that? Oh, Olena or Viktor, I think that needs to be either one of you.
So what has been reported that, yes, it's actually, that's what I mentioned. It's this so-called providing material incentives for voters. It can be direct when you actually give something, or it can be indirect when it is kind of provided in terms of kind of hidden things. It is still happening in Ukraine, but what I have understood from monitoring of the analysis, it is much less than it has been in the past.
And at least during the last opinion polls conducted by our colleagues, about 62% of the electors are very negative towards the bribery. So I think it's a positive sign.
Absolutely. This is another sign of growing maturity of the voters.
Or a sign that the elections don't matter very much. That's
No.
the other possibility.
No.
Well, if I may jump in, you know.
And maybe I can just, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, very short, you know, remark. Absolutely, you know, it's clear that, you know, still oligarchs are playing their role, and it's unavoidable almost. Then perhaps there can be also some attempts to buy votes or whatever. You know. We were facing very similar, you know, situations, and not so, you know, a long time ago we will get rid of some of those, you know, bad things happening during elections. But what I would say is that, you know, why I am optimist looking into the future. It's not only that, you know, voters are learning from democracy itself, which slowly but perhaps it's happening, and sometimes, you know, you need to suffer quite a lot because you voted not in a prudent way, you know, and populists usually very quickly they prove that the choice to vote for them was wrong. But also that, you know, in general, really we need to reestablish democracy, you know, especially during this period of time, since things are developing very rapidly, and new technologies like internet, websites, telegram channels are really changing so heavily, you know, the whole landscape of democracy, that sometimes, you know, we who are you know, I would call myself, you know, conservative and based on some kind of, you know, traditional democracy understanding, I am almost lost, you know. For example, if you look into, not into Ukraine, but into you know, neighboring Belarus, what had happened? All the media was controlled by Lukashenko. But suddenly it appeared that, you know, all those telegram channels, which he cannot, you know, control, they influence much more opinion of the people, of course, because of different conditions and so on and so on. But that is what is happening. And that is why, for example, I am absolutely sure that oligarchs will start to lose their power in Ukraine, not simply because, you know, things will change, so, you know, and they will lose their economical power or whatever, but simply because people will have much more of ability to get information, not from their controlled media. That is what will start to happen.
Okay, I have a question here. That was somebody's alarm clock, it sounded like. Is there a single online source for local election results? Do we know that? Is there such a source? Olena or Viktor? I think that
Victor may
one of
know
you shouldn't.
better.
You don't know.
Me as well.
Do you know, Viktor? Online source for the local election result. Does it exist?
I know only the one possible source. So this is the Central Electoral Committee, but speaking frankly, it doesn't function relevantly.
From the non-governmental sector, I may mention, of course, Network Opora, then Council of Voters, Komitet Wyborów.
Committee of Vote.
And Center Razumkov, I don't know if you are going to present, or democratic initiatives.
We do not have any specific initiative on this issue, but maybe our colleagues will from the democratic initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately,
okay, I would just like to come back to this issue.
Well, I wanted to say that unfortunately I cannot say that I know any online source where all the information is collected.
Okay, thank you, Viktor. I just wanted to come back a second to this issue of the oligarchs, because I agree with what you said, Mr. Kubilius, about the importance of having different sources of information. But I mean, if we go back to when President Zelensky was elected, I mean, one of his key priorities was actually getting rid of the oligarchs, getting rid of the vested interests in Ukraine. And it seems to me 1.5 years on, there hasn't been too much success in this, you know, in terms of his priority. I mean, you mentioned Mr. Kolomoisky before, who still seems to be rather active. But obviously, Mr. Kolomoisky is not the only oligarch that is still active in Ukraine. So, I mean, how would you all assess the efforts of Zelensky in meeting this aim of reducing the rule of the oligarch? And also, just as a final question, you know, my own question is related to the fight against, you know, corruption, because I mean, it seems, you know, from reports that some anti-corruption measures have been going back in the wrong direction, which would be very bad news indeed. And do you see, you know, really a momentum or a real political will from the current government to reverse this and to forge ahead with stronger anti-corruption measures? Because obviously this is the #1 question in terms of Ukraine having a prosperous and successful future, you know, having, you know, no corruption and an independent judiciary, etc. And we seem to be still very far away from that.
Thank you, Amanda. Well, let us start from the question about the anti-corruption fight. Okay. First of all, I think that it's a very long story where our presidents and governments and parliaments declared their anti-corruption fight, and we didn't see since the time any serious success, which is also true. And well, for the last 5 years, we saw the 5 new institutions installed, such as the Anti-Corruption Bureau, the Bureau for Commission for the Corruption Preventing, the Special Anti-Corruption Court, and their efforts were not equal, and their results were till this time very poor, to be frank. The only thing I can hope for is that at least we will see the real work of all these newly established institutions, which will result not only in the demonstrative persecutions of some persons, but first of all, in creating the anti-corruption or maybe preventing the corruption in many areas of the state politics, which is probably the issue number one. We need to establish, first of all, the new rules, the rules where no corruption is possible, and only after them the criminal and other persecutions. And if you asked me about the political will of the President Zelensky, his environment, and the new government and the new parliament, I will say that probably some people there want to fight the corruption. Some people there want to use the corruptionist practices, and everything always depends on the real political will and on the societal demand, which is really high. And maybe I'm a very cautious optimist, but I believe that the only thing that could force our government to at least open this struggle against corruption in the society.
To echo Viktor's words, oligarchs is just a part of the problem, and fight against corruption, it's a systemic problem of Ukraine, and it's one of the major things which Ukraine still needs to do and still needs to improve in its political system. And impact of oligarchs is much bigger. It's much more negative than just owning some media or paying for some political forces or standing behind this or that politician. The impact is very pervasive for society, and at least it has been acknowledged. And what we need to achieve with all our further transformation, democratic development, is just establishment of anti-corruption institutions, anti-corruption procedures everywhere at every level, and that they do not depend on who is our president, who is our prime minister, and so on and so on. And whoever comes, these institutions are independent, stay strong, and stay on defending Ukraine. And this is the road where we are, and this is the goal which has been declared, and already a lot has been done, but of course much more is to be done.
If I may,
I'm sorry, Mr. Kubilius.
Yeah,
Just a remark. As for the oligarchs, I can only agree with Mr. Kubilius that the new era, the era of the new technologies, the new information and the new access to the information can be really crucial for the previous rules of the game.
Absolutely, corruption is, of course, and rule of law are two basic, topics and most important items, and absolutely, sure that the EU is looking very careful and very deeply into developments in that area, even because in some countries of EU, rule of law is not, on the best, level or perfect level. So one reason, of course, corruption and rule of law is also, the basis for development. But the question is how to achieve, better results. I agree, really you need to have proper institutions, to fight against corruption. But if you will concentrate yourself only on institutions, again, that's perhaps not the best way, It's really, crucial to have supervisors and so on, who will do their job. But you can remember from Roman times, very simple question: who will supervise supervisors? That's the basic question. I see really that perhaps at least our own experience, what made in Lithuania some big developments in fight against corruption, and where we saw really the positive outcomes. First of all, I would name one area. It was what we did not so many years ago, but in 2011, 2012, when we changed rules of how election campaigns should be financed and how political parties should be financed. When we prohibited, it's again totally un-American, approach. We prohibited private, financing and business financing, especially, and much more of state budget, subsidies were coming to political parties. That really changed the whole environment of political life. Second field, which I would mention again, when again not so long ago, we made deep reforms in state-owned enterprises with so-called corporate governance, reforms and so on. Because before that, state-owned enterprises were very much influenced and very much used by the government, by ruling parties, to have some benefits for their, political or private goals. And the last point is really, its emphasis on more transparent regulation of business environment. Doing business, World Bank, reports on doing business were crucial again for us. You have one famous expert on that. I don't know what's your opinion, Mikhail Saakashvili. Well, really, I knew him from his time in Georgia, when really they concentrated very much on this doing business ratings, and that was one of the reasons why really also corruption in Georgia went down quite heavily. So there are things, some things which still you can learn from, even from Misha Saakashvili. I'm not advocating him, but some good reforms were done in Georgia at that time. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Melinda, any thoughts on this?
I agree with the way that Olena and Viktor characterized the anti-corruption fight, the importance of it. And I would say that Ukraine really needs to get its courts right. And there's been a reluctance in the Zelensky administration to address the body, the High Council of Justice. And that's the body that they have to get right. And they need international experts. So that's all.
Okay. We have to draw this event to an end now. I apologize for going over a few minutes. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists for coming and giving us great insights into this topic. Let's hope that all goes well with the local elections, and that Ukraine continues to move in the right direction, thereafter, in terms of sticking to the reform process, because it's so important for the future prosperity and success of this really beautiful country that has so much potential in every way, which is yet to be delivered to the population and far beyond, actually. So thanks to all of you. A special thanks to Olena for the cooperation today. Also a special thanks to the colleagues from the US mission to the EU for their cooperation. We really appreciate all of your time. EPC will continue to focus on Ukraine in the coming months and years, as we always have done. And I look forward to seeing the audience and all of you guys as well at a future event. Olena, I don't know if you have any final closing comment.
Yes, indeed, on behalf of the Ukrainian, now I'm speaking as a co-organizer, on behalf of the Ukrainian think tank Liaison office, I also would love to thank all of the speakers for this really interesting and fruitful discussion. And what I really like, that we started this local elections in Ukraine, but we went through this, what I like, how Mr. Kubilius put it, tectonic changes in the Eastern Partnership region, and also looking overseas to US, and we wish you no, I'm serious about this, because we all are interested in as democratic as possible outcome of these elections. And yes, we thank our supporter, International Renaissance Foundation mission of US to EU. And Amanda, to you, my special thanks that we have done this, and it's one of the events in the row. Keep going, and we will keep providing you information and insights from Ukraine and beyond. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Olena. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody have a nice afternoon. Bye-bye.
You too, all of you.